Rain hammered against the city skyline as Ava Parker stood outside a luxury hotel, clutching the straps of her worn handbag. She had just lost her apartment, her savings were nearly gone, and tomorrow morning, she was supposed to interview for the biggest opportunity of her life. She didn't know that one unexpected decision that stormy night would change everything forever. Inside the hotel ballroom, a charity fundraiser was ending. Wealthy executives laughed beneath crystal chandeliers while servers cleared away expensive meals that could have fed dozens of families. Ava wasn't there as a guest. She was volunteering. She believed that helping others mattered, even when her own life was falling apart. While carrying donation boxes toward the loading dock, she noticed a man sitting alone on the rooftop terrace. His expensive suit was soaked from the rain, untouched wine beside him, his eyes fixed on the dark city below. Everyone else ignored him. Ava didn't. She quietly walked over and held out an umbrella. "You'll catch a cold." The man barely looked at her. "I prefer the rain," she shrugged. "Rain doesn't solve problems." His lips twitched slightly. "And kindness does? Sometimes." That single conversation lasted less than 20 minutes. No names, no introductions. Just two strangers sharing silence. Coffee from a vending machine. And honest conversations neither had ever shared with anyone else. He admitted the pressure of running a billion-dollar company. She admitted she was terrified of failing. For the first time in years, both of them laughed. Hours later, after the fundraiser ended, the storm became so severe that roads closed throughout downtown. The hotel had no available standard rooms. Only one executive suite remained. The receptionist mistakenly believed they were a couple stranded by the weather, too exhausted to argue. They accepted the room. They agreed to sleep separately, ordering food and talking deep into the night about family, dreams, regrets, and second chances. By sunrise, they quietly went their separate ways. Neither expected to ever meet again. Monday morning arrived. Ava nervously entered the towering headquarters of Kingston Global Holdings for her interview. Every employee seemed intimidated. No one smiled. Whispers echoed through the lobby. "The CEO is impossible. He fires people for tiny mistakes. He doesn't trust anyone." Ava swallowed hard. She followed the assistant into the boardroom. The massive doors opened. Her heart nearly stopped. Standing beside the floor-to-ceiling windows was the man from the hotel, perfectly tailored black suit, cold expression. Sharp gray eyes, the same stranger. Only now, he wasn't just another guest. He was Alexander Kingston, the billionaire CEO, the most feared executive in the company. His expression remained unreadable. He simply looked at her. "You." The interview panel froze. "You know each other?" Alexander answered calmly. "We've met. Nothing more. Nothing less." Ava expected special treatment. Instead, the interview became the hardest of her life. Every answer was challenged. Every idea questioned. Every weakness exposed. When it ended, she walked out convinced she had failed. That evening, her phone rang. "You got the job." She almost cried. Not because it was easy, because she had earned it. Working for Alexander proved exhausting. He expected perfection. Deadlines arrived earlier than scheduled. Meetings started before sunrise. He rarely smiled. He never praised anyone. Employees feared hearing his footsteps. Yet Ava noticed something nobody else seemed to see. Every Friday, anonymous donations appeared at children's hospitals. Medical bills were mysteriously paid. Scholarships quietly funded. Food banks suddenly received truckloads of supplies. Nobody knew where the money came from. Until one evening, she accidentally discovered Alexander personally delivering supplies to a homeless shelter, wearing ordinary clothes. And a baseball cap. No cameras, no reporters, no publicity. He asked volunteers not to mention his name. She watched from across the street, stunned. The cold CEO the world feared spent his nights helping strangers. Their professional relationships slowly changed, not because he favored her, because she challenged him. When he rejected a proposal helping struggling employees, Ava stood her ground. Profit matters. So do people. They're expensive. So is replacing loyal workers. Silence filled the conference room. Everyone expected her to be fired. Instead, Alexander quietly nodded. Prepare a better proposal. Weeks later, employee wellness programs expanded across the company. Mental health support improved. Autocrats received better family leave. Thousands of lives quietly became easier. No announcement credited Ava. She didn't mind. Seeing people smile was enough. Late one evening, she found Alexander asleep in his office, laptop still open, tie loosened, coffee untouched, dark circles beneath his eyes. For someone worth billions, he looked painfully lonely. She quietly placed a blanket over him before leaving. The next morning, he called her into his office. I don't need sympathy. It wasn't sympathy. What was it? Kindness. He stared at her longer than usual. No one had cared for him without expecting something in return. Not for a very long time. Months passed. The company prepared for its largest international merger. Stress reached dangerous levels. Executives fought constantly. Investors demanded impossible results. One evening, Alexander suddenly collapsed during an important meeting. The room erupted into panic. Everyone froze. Except Ava. She immediately called emergency services, monitored his breathing, cleared the room, and stayed beside him until doctors arrived. At the hospital, reporters gathered outside. Executives argued about stock prices. Board members worried about investors. Only Ava sat quietly in the waiting room, holding untouched coffee. When Alexander finally woke hours later, the first face he saw was hers. You stayed. Of course. You had no reason. I didn't need one. For the first time since losing his parents years earlier, someone stayed simply because they cared. After recovering, Alexander began changing, not dramatically, gradually. He learned employees' names. He listened more. He smiled occasionally. Entire departments noticed. The intimidating CEO wasn't becoming weaker. He was becoming human again. His company performed even better. People worked harder for leaders who genuinely cared. Then came the biggest surprise. During the company's annual charity gala, Alexander walked onto the stage before thousands of employees. Instead of discussing profits, he told a story. A year ago, I believed success meant standing alone. The audience listened silently. Then someone carrying donation boxes handed me an umbrella. He looked toward Ava, standing near the back of the ballroom. She reminded me that strength isn't found in power. It's found in kindness. Gasps spread across the room. Alexander announced a new foundation, supporting struggling students, single parents, and emergency medical care for employees around the world. He named the initiative after his late mother, explaining that one person's compassion had inspired him to honor her legacy. Instead of hiding from his grief, Ava felt tears forming, not because everyone was watching, but because she knew the lonely man from the rainy rooftop had finally allowed himself to heal. The applause echoed throughout the ballroom as their eyes met across the crowded room, both remembering the stormy night when two strangers had shared an umbrella and unknowingly changed each other's lives forever. The morning after the charity gala, the atmosphere inside Kingston Global Holdings felt different. Employees smiled more. Managers greeted one another. For the first time in years, people weren't just working for a paycheck. They felt like they belonged. Yet Alexander Kingston remained as unreadable as ever in public. Behind closed doors, however, his attention kept drifting toward one person. Ava. Every report she submitted landed on the top of his desk. Every meeting somehow required her presence. Every major project seemed to include her name. His assistant, Emma, couldn't help noticing. Sir, Alexander didn't look up. What? You've rearranged your schedule 3 times today. So, every meeting now includes Miss Parker. Alexander calmly signed another document. She's competent. Emma smiled to herself. Of course she is. Ava had no idea why she was suddenly being assigned to work directly with the CEO. She assumed he simply trusted her judgment, nothing more. When colleagues teased her, she laughed it off. If he liked me, she joked, he wouldn't make me work until midnight. Unfortunately, that very evening she found herself alone in the executive conference room, reviewing hundreds of pages of financial reports. Her stomach growled. She checked the clock, 11:47 p.m. The entire building was nearly empty. Suddenly, someone placed a paper bag beside her laptop. She looked up. Alexander. You skipped dinner. She blinked. You noticed? You've skipped lunch 3 days this week. She stared at him. You noticed that too? He hesitated for half a second. I notice everything. He turned to leave. Ava opened the bag, a grilled chick sandwich, fresh fruit, the exact iced coffee she ordered every Friday. She smiled without realizing it. Days later, the company organized a weekend volunteer event at a children's hospital. No executives were required to attend. Most didn't. When Ava arrived wearing jeans and a simple blue sweater, she was surprised to see Alexander already there, rolling up his sleeves. The children had no idea who he was. To them, he was simply Mr. Alex. One little boy tugged on his jacket. Can you build my Lego castle? Alexander sat on the floor without hesitation for nearly an hour. No phone, no meetings, no billionaire attitude, just laughter. Ava watched from across the room. She finally understood. The cold CEO wasn't pretending to be kind. The boardroom version of Alexander was the mask. This was the real man. On the drive back to the city, heavy snow began falling. Traffic came to a complete stop, their driver sighed. We may be here for hours. Alexander glanced toward Ava. Hungry? She laughed. Always. They stepped into a tiny roadside diner. It looked nothing like the luxury restaurants Alexander usually visited. Old booths, coffee stains on the menu, Dunrai music playing softly. The elderly waitress smiled warmly. You two married? Both answered at the same time. No, the waitress chuckled. Could have fooled me. Alexander actually smiled. A real one. Ava nearly dropped her coffee. You smile. I've smiled before, not around me. I try not to encourage distractions. She rolled her eyes. You really are impossible. And yet, he looked directly into her eyes. You keep staying. For a brief moment, neither looked away, until the waitress interrupted with apple pie. The following Monday, gossip spread through the office. A beautiful woman had arrived on the executive floor. Elegant, confident, famous. Her name was Victoria Langford, a successful businesswoman, and according to everyone, Alexander's former fiancé. Ava felt something she hadn't expected. Disappointment. She immediately hated herself for it. Why should she care? Alexander was her boss. Nothing more. Still, watching Victoria casually walk into his private office made something inside her ache. She buried herself in work. If she stayed busy enough, maybe the feeling would disappear. It didn't. Victoria noticed immediately. She wasn't blind. Alexander's eyes unconsciously searched every room until they found Ava. Whenever Ava spoke during meetings, he listened. Whenever Ava disagreed, he considered her opinion. Whenever Ava smiled, his expression softened almost invisibly. Victoria understood. The man who had once refused to believe in love had already fallen. He simply hadn't admitted it yet. That evening, Victoria invited Ava to dinner. I'd like to thank you. Ava frowned. For what? For giving Alexander his heart back. Ava laughed awkwardly. I think you've misunderstood. No. Victoria smiled gently. I know him better than anyone. She stirred her tea before continuing. When we were engaged, he worked 18 hours a day. He never celebrated birthdays. He never took vacations. He didn't even remember to eat. But now, he leaves the office before midnight. He visits children's hospitals. He laughs. She looked directly at Ava. He became that man because of you. Ava whispered softly. I never asked him to change. I know. Victoria smiled again. That's exactly why he did. A week later, Kingston Global prepared for the largest investor presentation in company history. Everything had to be perfect. Minutes before Alexander walked on stage, the presentation system crashed. Years of financial projections disappeared. Executives panicked. Investors were already taking their seats. Someone whispered, "We're finished." Ava quickly grabbed a whiteboard marker. "Forget the slides." Alexander looked at her. "What? You know every number. You don't need a screen. For once, talk to them, not at them." He studied her face, then nodded. He walked onto the stage with nothing but a marker. For nearly 2 hours, he answered every question from memory. No scripts, no teleprompter, no slides, just honesty. By the end of the presentation, investors stood and applauded. The company's stock reached its highest value in history the next morning. Reporters praised Alexander's confidence. Only he knew the truth. Without Ava, he never would have walked onto that stage. That evening, he found her alone on the rooftop terrace, the same place where their lives had unknowingly begun to intertwine. The city lights shimmered below. Snowflakes drifted silently through the air. Alexander stepped beside her. "I've been trying to understand something." She looked at him. "What?" "The night we met, I thought it was coincidence. Now I think it was fate." Before Ava could answer, footsteps echoed behind them. Emma hurried toward the rooftop, her face pale. "Mr. Kingston." She struggled to catch her breath. "You need to come downstairs immediately." Alexander frowned. "What happened?" Emma looked at both of them before quietly saying, "Someone from your past is here, and they say Ava has been lying to you from the very beginning." The rooftop fell silent. Ava's smile disappeared. Alexander's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" he asked. Emma swallowed nervously. "A woman is downstairs asking for Miss Parker. She insists she has proof that Ava has been hiding something from you." Alexander immediately turned to Ava. She looked genuinely confused. "I don't know who it could be. Let's find out." When they entered the executive lobby, every employee had stopped working. Standing near the reception desk was a glamorous woman in a designer coat. Her expression was calm, almost smug. The moment she saw Ava, she smiled. "Hello, little sister." Ava froze. "Rachel." Alexander looked between them. "You know each other?" Rachel laughed softly. "We're family." The room filled with whispers. No one had ever heard Ava mention a sister. Rachel stepped closer. "You've changed. You look successful." Ava remained silent. "What do you want?" Rachel pulled an old photograph from her purse. It showed two young girls standing outside a small house. "I think your boss deserves to know who you really are." Alexander said nothing. He simply waited. Rachel continued. "Miss Perfect forgot to mention she used to run away whenever life became difficult." Ava finally spoke. "That's not true." "No?" Rachel smiled coldly. "Then tell him why you left home." The office became painfully quiet. Ava slowly took a deep breath. "When I was 16, our mother became seriously ill." Rachel crossed her arms. "Our father disappeared years earlier. I worked after school. I quit studying. I tried to pay the hospital bills." Her voice trembled. "But there wasn't enough money." She looked at Rachel. "You blamed me." Rachel's expression hardened. "You left." "I left because you told me never to come back. You said I ruined everything." For the first time, Rachel had no answer. Alexander watched both women carefully. He wasn't interested in gossip. He wanted the truth. Ava continued quietly. "I spent years working 3 jobs. I slept in shelters. I skipped meals. I sent money home every month. I never included my name." Rachel looked away. Alexander frowned. "You sent money?" Rachel whispered. "I received anonymous payments. You knew?" "I suspected, but I wasn't sure." Ava smiled sadly. "I didn't want thanks. I just wanted Mom to get better." Tears filled Rachel's eyes. "Our mother knew." Ava looked shocked. "What?" "Before she died," Rachel's voice cracked. "She told me. She said every medicine, every hospital bill, every meal came from you." Rachel finally broke down, crying. "I was too proud to admit I was wrong. I spent years hating you, when I should have been thanking you." The employees standing nearby quietly wiped away tears. Alexander couldn't look away from Ava. She had never told anyone. Not once. She had carried that pain alone. Rachel slowly handed Ava a small envelope. This belonged to Mom. Inside was an old handwritten letter. Ava unfolded it with trembling hands. My precious daughter, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't tell you in person. You gave up your dream so I could keep mine. I prayed one day someone would love you the way you've loved everyone else. You deserve happiness. You always have. A single tear rolled down Ava's cheek. Alexander gently placed a hand on her shoulder. She didn't move away. For the first time, she allowed herself to cry. That evening, Alexander canceled every meeting, every dinner, every business call. Instead, he drove Ava to the quiet lakeside park outside the city. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. Finally, he broke the silence. You always help everyone else. She smiled weakly. I try, but who helps you? She stared across the frozen lake. No one has to. I've gotten used to it. Alexander looked directly at her. I don't want you to. She turned toward him. I don't want you carrying everything alone anymore. Those words touched her more deeply than expensive gifts ever could. Over the next few weeks, something changed between them. Not officially, not publicly, but naturally. He waited for her after meetings. She reminded him to eat lunch. He secretly replaced her broken laptop with a brand new one. She quietly donated her annual bonus to the Employee Emergency Fund. Neither expected recognition. They simply cared. Unfortunately, not everyone appreciated their growing closeness. Inside the boardroom, several senior directors had begun whispering. The CEO is distracted. He's making emotional decisions. That woman is influencing him. One director, Victor Hale, had wanted Alexander removed for years. Now he believed he'd found the perfect opportunity. If we destroy her reputation, we destroy his. Victor hired private investigators. Within days, misleading headlines began appearing online. CEO's secret romance with employee. Promotion based on love, not talent. Company ethics under investigation. Social media exploded. Reporters camped outside headquarters. Employees became divided. Some defended Ava. Others questioned everything. Ava walked into the office surrounded by cameras. Questions flew from every direction. Did you seduce the CEO? Were you hired because of your relationship? Is the company hiding corruption? She lowered her head and kept walking. Alexander watched everything from his office window. His jaw tightened. He had spent years protecting the company. Now the woman who had protected his heart was being attacked because of him. That night, he made a decision that would shock the entire business world. The next morning, every television station, news website, and financial network announced an emergency press conference by Alexander Kingston. No one knew what he was about to say, not even Ava. As thousands of reporters gathered outside Kingston Global headquarters, Alexander walked toward the podium, looked into the sea of cameras, adjusted the microphone, and prepared to reveal a truth that could either save Ava's future or destroy everything he had spent his life building. Hundreds of cameras flashed as Alexander Kingston stepped onto the stage. Television crews broadcast the press conference live across the country. Employees watched from the company cafeteria. Investors watched from boardrooms. Ava stood backstage, her heart pounding. She had no idea what Alexander was about to say. He adjusted the microphone and looked directly into the cameras. There have been many rumors about Miss Ava Parker. The reporters immediately leaned forward. I will answer every question. Silence fell over the room. First, Miss Parker was hired because she earned the position. Every interview was recorded. Every hiring decision followed company policy. Our internal audit and an independent review confirmed that. Several reporters exchanged surprised glances. Alexander continued. Second, there has been no favoritism. In fact, I have been harder on her than anyone else in this company. A few employees watching the live stream nodded. They knew it was true. Alexander paused before saying the words no one expected. The real story is that Miss Parker made me a better leader. The room became completely silent. He continued calmly. Before I met her, I believed success meant winning at any cost. I measured people by performance. I forgot compassion. I forgot humanity. She reminded me that great companies are built by great people. This company is stronger today because of her ideas, and I will never apologize for listening to good advice. The applause started slowly, then grew louder. Even several reporters found themselves clapping. Backstage, Ava covered her mouth, fighting back tears. Questions came quickly. Mr. Kingston, are you romantically involved with Miss Parker? The entire room held its breath. Alexander looked toward the cameras. My personal life is exactly that. Personal. But I will say this. I respect Miss Parker more than anyone I have ever worked with. She has my complete trust. He ended the press conference without confirming or denying the rumors. Yet one thing was obvious. He had publicly chosen to stand beside her. Within hours, public opinion began to change. Journalists who had investigated Ava's background uncovered years of volunteer work, anonymous donations, and countless acts of kindness. Former coworkers described her as honest and hardworking. Employees shared stories online about how she had quietly helped struggling families without asking for recognition. The negative headlines slowly disappeared. New ones replaced them. The employee who changed a billionaire CEO. Candidness behind Kingston Global's new success. Ava never gave interviews. She simply returned to work. Victor Hale watched everything from his office with growing anger. His plan had failed. If anything, Alexander's reputation had become even stronger. He slammed his fist onto his desk. This isn't over. He opened a locked drawer and removed a thick, confidential file. Inside were documents connected to a business deal from nearly 10 years earlier. A deal Alexander knew nothing about. One that had been secretly arranged by Victor. If exposed, it could destroy the company. Victor smiled to himself. If I can't remove Alexander, I'll make him destroy himself. A week later, Kingston Global hosted its annual leadership retreat at a mountain resort. Executives attended strategy meetings during the day. Evenings were reserved for networking events. On the second night, a sudden snowstorm cut off every road leading to the resort. Electricity failed. The entire hotel went dark. Emergency generators powered only a few lights. Guests gathered in the main lounge. The atmosphere felt strangely peaceful. Without phones or laptops, people actually talked. Alexander found Ava sitting beside the fireplace, reading an old novel. You always carry a book? She smiled. It reminds me the world is bigger than work. He sat beside her. For years, I thought work was my entire life. And now? He looked into the fire. Now I'm not so sure. The storm continued through the night. Unable to sleep, they walked outside beneath the falling snow. Everything was quiet. The mountains glowed under the moonlight. Ava laughed as snowflakes landed in her hair. Alexander couldn't stop looking at her. What? You laugh differently now. She tilted her head. What does that mean? The first night we met, your smile hid sadness. Now, it's real. She looked at him for several seconds. So is yours. For the first time since that rainy night at the hotel, neither of them looked away. Alexander slowly reached for her hand. She didn't pull back. Their fingers intertwined naturally, as though they had always belonged together. Ava, he spoke softly. I've negotiated billion-dollar contracts. I've spoken before thousands of investors. But somehow, I'm nervous right now, she smiled. Why? Because this is the only decision in my life that actually scares me. Before she could answer, a loud explosion echoed through the mountains. The ground shook beneath their feet. The resort's emergency alarms began blaring. Guests screamed inside the hotel. Alexander immediately pulled Ava behind him as smoke rose from the lower level of the building. Someone shouted from the entrance. The boiler room exploded. People are trapped inside. Without hesitation, Ava ran toward the smoke. Alexander grabbed her wrist. It's too dangerous. There are children in there. She pulled free and disappeared into the burning hotel. Alexander stared after her for only a second. Then, without another thought, he ran into the flames. After the woman, he realized he could no longer imagine losing. Smoke filled the hotel corridors within seconds. Emergency alarms echoed through every floor. Guests rushed toward the exits in panic. But Ava wasn't running away. She was running toward the danger. There's a family trapped on the second floor. A hotel employee shouted. Without hesitating, Ava wrapped a wet towel around her face and disappeared into the thick smoke. Ava! Alexander yelled. She didn't stop. Neither did he. Ignoring the firefighters' warnings, Alexander followed her into the burning building. Inside, visibility was almost zero. The air burned their lungs, the ceiling groaned above them. Pieces of wood crashed onto the floor. A frightened little girl cried from behind a locked guest room door. Mommy! Ava rushed toward the sound. It's okay, she called. We're here. She tried the handle, locked it. Alexander kicked the door once. Nothing. Twice, still nothing. On the third kick, the door burst open. Inside, a mother was trapped beneath a fallen wooden beam while her young daughter clung tightly to her. Alexander lifted the heavy beam with all his strength. Take them, he shouted. Ava helped the little girl into her arms before supporting the injured mother. Go, Alexander ordered. But you! I'll be right behind you. Ava nodded and guided them toward the staircase, just as Alexander followed. Part of the ceiling collapsed behind him, cutting off the hallway. The only remaining exit was rapidly filling with flames. Outside, firefighters rushed the rescued family to ambulances. The little girl refused to let go of Ava's hand. You saved my mommy. Ava smiled through tears. You were very brave. The child hugged her tightly. Alexander finally emerged from the smoke-covered entrance moments later. The crowd erupted into applause. News cameras captured everything. The Billionaire CEO covered in ash. The employee standing beside him. Neither cared about the cameras. Their only concern had been saving lives. The next morning, every news channel praised their courage. Headlines spread around the world. CEO risks his life to rescue hotel guests. What it, and billionaire save family from mountain resort fire. Social media celebrated them as heroes. But back at Kingston Global, Victor Hale saw something different. Opportunity. If Alexander's popularity continued growing, removing him from the company would become impossible. Victor decided it was time to use the secret he had protected for years. 2 days later, the company's board of directors received anonymous documents. The files accused Kingston Global of illegally acquiring land nearly a decade earlier. The signatures appeared genuine. The contracts looked authentic. Financial records matched. Within hours, government investigators arrived at company headquarters. News helicopters circled overhead. Employees stood outside in shock. Alexander reviewed every page carefully. I've never seen these documents before. Victor pretended to be equally surprised. This is terrible. We may all be in serious trouble. Several board members immediately demanded Alexander step down until the investigation was complete. One director stood. For the sake of the company, I move to suspend the CEO. Hands slowly began rising around the table. Alexander remained calm. He accepted responsibility for the company, even though he knew nothing about the documents. If stepping aside protects our employees, I'll do it. Ava stared at him in disbelief. He was willing to sacrifice everything to keep the company stable. But something didn't feel right. She remembered one tiny detail. The signature on the oldest contract looked different, not completely forged, just unnatural, almost as if someone had carefully copied Alexander's handwriting. That night, while everyone else went home, Ava stayed behind. She searched through thousands of archived files, old emails, board meeting minutes, financial reports, security logs, after hour. Nothing. Just before sunrise, she found an overlooked maintenance record. 10 years earlier, the company's document archive had briefly been moved during office renovations. Only 3 executives had access during that period: Alexander, the former legal director, and Victor Hale. Ava's heartbeat quickened. She dug deeper. Another file, another signature, another inconsistency. Every suspicious contract had passed through Victor's office before reaching the board. She whispered to herself, it was him. At that exact moment, the lights in the archive room suddenly went out. The door slammed shut behind her. She spun around. Someone had locked it from the outside. A slow pair of footsteps echoed in the darkness. Then Victor's voice came through the other side of the door. You should have gone home, Miss Parker. His voice was calm, almost cheerful. You were never supposed to find those files. Ava grabbed her phone. No signal. The archive room had thick concrete walls. Victor laughed quietly. No one can hear you, and by morning, neither the files nor you will be anyone's problem. The archive room was completely dark. Ava's breathing became uneven as she pounded on the heavy steel door. Help! No answer. Only silence. She forced herself to stay calm. Panicking wouldn't get her out. She turned on the flashlight on her phone. The battery read 12%. She looked around the room. Dozens of dusty shelves, old filing cabinets, boxes stacked to the ceiling. Somewhere in here was the evidence Victor wanted to destroy. And now, she was trapped with it. Outside, Alexander couldn't stop thinking about Ava. She had promised to meet him after work. She never missed appointments. He called her. No answer. Agon. Straight to voicemail. A strange feeling settled in his chest. Something. He immediately checked the company's security system. The last camera to capture Ava showed her entering the archive room nearly 2 hours earlier. No footage showed her leaving. Alexander rushed downstairs with the head of security. When they reached the archive hallway, the steel door was locked from the outside. Alexander's expression turned cold. Open it! The master key isn't working, sir. Alexander stepped back, then kicked the door with all his strength. It barely moved. Again, the frame cracked. A third kick. The lock finally snapped. The door swung open. Ava. She looked toward the light. Relief flooded her face. You came. Alexander crossed the room in seconds. Without thinking, he pulled her into a tight embrace. For several long moments, neither of them spoke. He had spent years controlling every emotion, but the thought of losing her had shattered that control completely. Finally, he whispered, I thought I was too late. Ava closed her eyes. So did I. She showed him the documents she had discovered. The signatures all passed through Victor. Alexander examined them carefully. His face darkened. This proves he handled every contract. But we still need proof that he forged them. Just then, Ava noticed something tucked inside an old storage box, a small digital backup drive. Its label read, Legal Archive, Confidential. Alexander immediately recognized it. This was supposed to be destroyed years ago. They hurried to his office and plugged the drive into a secure computer. Thousands of archived emails appeared. Among them, one message changed everything. It had been sent from Victor to the former legal director 10 years earlier. Replace the original contract. Alexander must never know. Attached to the email was the genuine agreement. Every forged signature, every altered page, every illegal transfer. Victor had orchestrated the entire scheme. Alexander leaned back in silence. For years, he had blamed himself for decisions he never made. Now the truth was finally in front of him. The next morning, an emergency board meeting was called. Every director attended. Government investigators filled the room. Victor walked in confidently. He smiled when he saw Alexander. Ready to resign? Alexander simply slid the backup drive across the table. Victor's smile faded. The investigators opened the files. One email after another appeared on the large screen. Board members stared in disbelief. The room fell silent. Finally, The lead investigator looked directly at Victor. Would you like to explain these messages? Victor tried to speak. Nothing came out. Security officers entered the room. One stepped forward. Mr. Hale, you need to come with us. Victor looked desperately around the table. No one defended him. As he was escorted away, he glared at Ava. This isn't over. She calmly met his eyes. It is. The board unanimously voted to remove Victor from the company. Alexander was fully cleared of all accusations. Kingston Global's reputation was restored. That evening, the building was unusually quiet. Most employees had gone home early after the exhausting week. Alexander found Ava standing on the rooftop, looking over the city lights. He joined her. We won. She smiled softly. We did. No, he shook his head. You did. If you hadn't stayed late, if you hadn't kept searching, I would have lost everything. Ava looked at him. I couldn't let that happen. Why? She laughed quietly. Do I really have to answer that? For a moment, neither of them spoke. The cool evening breeze swept across the rooftop, the same place where so many turning points in their lives had begun. Alexander took a slow breath. I've spent months pretending you're just my employee, pretending I don't look for you in every room, pretending my day isn't better the moment I see you. He stepped closer. I can't pretend anymore. Ava's heart raced. Before she could answer, Alexander gently took her hand. I love you, Ava. I think I have since the night you handed me that umbrella. Her eyes filled with tears. For a few seconds, the entire city seemed to disappear. Only the two of them remained. She whispered, I was afraid. Of what? That if I fell in love with my boss, I'd lose everything. Alexander smiled gently. And now? She looked into his eyes. Now, I think losing you would hurt far more. A slow smile spread across his face. He leaned in carefully, giving her every chance to step away. She didn't. Their first kiss was gentle, quiet, and long overdue. At that exact moment, Emma burst through the rooftop door, out of breath. Mr. Kingston. Alexander sighed with a laugh. Emma almost never interrupted him, which meant this had to be important. What is it? Emma held out a tablet with trembling hands. There's someone downstairs asking to see both of you. Alexander frowned. Who? Emma looked from him to Ava before answering quietly. They claim they're your husband, Ava. Alexander's smile disappeared. The rooftop suddenly felt colder. He slowly turned toward Ava. My husband? Ava looked just as shocked. What? Emma nodded nervously. That's exactly what he said. He insists he's legally married to Miss Parker. Ava immediately shook her head. That's impossible. I've never been married. Alexander studied her face carefully. He saw no hesitation, no guilt, only confusion. I believe you. Without another word, the three of them headed downstairs. In the executive lobby, a tall man in his early 30s stood with his hands in his pockets. His expensive suit looked worn, as though he hadn't slept in days. The moment he saw Ava, he smiled. You finally came. Ava stared at him. I don't know you. The man's smile faded. You really don't remember me? No, he sighed. My name is Ethan Brooks. I was your fiancé. The room fell silent. Ava's eyes widened. I never had a fiancé. Alexander stepped beside her. I think you'd better explain. Ethan reached into his briefcase and removed an old envelope. Inside were several photographs. One showed Ava standing beside him years earlier. Another showed both of them at a small family gathering. Then came something even more surprising. A marriage license, signed, stamped, official. Alexander carefully examined the document. Everything appeared genuine. He looked at Ava. She looked completely horrified. I've never seen this before, I swear. Ethan nodded sadly. I know. Alexander frowned. You know? Ethan took a long breath. Because you never signed it willingly. 10 years earlier, Ava's mother had been dying. Hospital bills were overwhelming. Rachel had disappeared after another argument. Ava was barely 18, desperate. One evening, Ethan's wealthy father approached Ava with an offer. He would pay every medical expense. In return, Ava only needed to sign several financial assistance forms. She agreed without reading every page. Her only concern was saving her mother. Ethan lowered his head. My father tricked both of us. He hid a marriage registration inside the paperwork. Ava's face turned pale. No, I didn't know until months later. When I found out, I tried to cancel everything. My father refused. He said the marriage gave him control over your inheritance if your mother passed away. Alexander's eyes darkened. So your father committed fraud. Ethan nodded yes. And I left home because of it. Ava slowly sat down. Everything suddenly made sense. The strange legal letters she had ignored years ago, the unknown signatures, the documents she never understood, she whispered. I thought they were hospital paperwork. Ethan looked at her with genuine regret. You were trying to save your mother. You trusted people. My family took advantage of that. I've spent years trying to fix it. He reached into his briefcase once more. This time he handed her another folder. Inside were court documents. The marriage has already been declared fraudulent. The court officially canceled it last month. I came today to give you the final papers. Ava stared at him. So, I'm free? Ethan smiled sadly. You always were. I just wanted to make sure no one could ever use those lies against you again. Alexander finally relaxed. For the first time since hearing the word husband, he allowed himself to breathe normally. Before leaving, Ethan turned toward Alexander. Take care of her. Alexander answered without hesitation. I will. Ethan smiled. I know. Then he quietly walked away, closing that painful chapter of Ava's life forever. Several weeks passed peacefully. For the first time since they met, life felt normal. Alexander and Ava still kept their relationship private inside the company. Nothing about her job changed. She still challenged him in meetings. He still expected excellence. Employees noticed only one difference. The CEO smiled more often. One afternoon, Emma rushed into Alexander's office. Sir, the annual Global Business Excellence Awards just announced this year's finalists. Alexander barely looked up. Congratulations. No, sir. They nominated you. He smiled politely. That's nice. And they nominated Miss Parker. Alexander looked up immediately. For what? Emma grinned. The Humanitarian Leadership Award. Ava blinked. There must be some mistake. Emma shook her head. The committee received hundreds of letters from hospital staff, employees, scholarship students, families you've helped. You were nominated by people whose lives you changed. Ava was speechless. She had never asked for recognition. She had simply helped whenever she could. A month later, Alexander and Ava attended the awards ceremony together. The ballroom was filled with world leaders, business executives, journalists, and nonprofit organizations. When the presenter announced the Humanitarian Leadership Award, the audience waited quietly, and this year's recipient is Ava Parker. The ballroom erupted into applause. Ava slowly walked onto the stage, overwhelmed. She accepted the award with trembling hands. Just as she was about to begin her speech, one of the organizers hurried onto the stage and whispered something into the host's ear. The host's smile disappeared. He looked toward Ava, then toward Alexander. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very sorry, but we've just received urgent news. The private jet carrying Mr. Kingston's younger brother has disappeared from radar over the North Atlantic. The applause stopped instantly. Alexander froze. He hadn't spoken to his younger brother in almost 8 years. Now, someone was saying he might never get the chance again. The ballroom fell into stunned silence. Ava lowered the award in her hands. Alexander stood frozen, unable to process what he had just heard. His younger brother, Daniel, the one person he had spent 8 years avoiding. The man he blamed for tearing their family apart. Now his plane had vanished. Without another word, Alexander left the stage. Ava followed him. Outside, black SUVs were already waiting. Emma rushed over with a tablet. The aviation authorities confirmed the aircraft disappeared from radar about 40 minutes ago. Any distress signal? No. Alexander's jaw tightened. We're leaving. Now. During the flight to the emergency response center, neither of them spoke much. Rain battered the windows. The silence was heavy. Finally, Ava reached for Alexander's hand. You still love him. Alexander stared out the window. I don't know. You do. He betrayed me. Did he? Alexander frowned. What do you mean? You've told me everyone else's story, but never his. Alexander closed his eyes. 8 years earlier, after their father's death, Daniel had suddenly left the family company. Alexander believed his brother had abandoned him to carry the business alone. He never forgave him. Not once. He never asked why Daniel left. He simply assumed the worst. Hours later, they arrived at the International Rescue Coordination Center. Large screens displayed weather maps, satellite images, and flight paths. Officials briefed the family. The aircraft encountered severe weather. We've located floating debris, Abi. But there is still hope. Search teams are continuing. Alexander silently nodded. Then someone approached from behind, an elderly woman. She looked at Alexander with tear-filled eyes. You must be Alex. He frowned. I'm sorry. Have we met? She smiled sadly. I'm Daniel's doctor. Alexander froze. Doctor? The woman nodded. For the past 8 years. Ava looked at Alexander. He had never known. The doctor handed him a thick medical file. Your brother asked me to give you this, only if something happened to him. Alexander slowly opened it. His hands trembled. Inside were years of medical reports, hospital records, treatment plans. One diagnosis appeared again and again, a rare heart condition. Alexander could barely breathe. He was sick. The doctor nodded. Very sick. He left the company because he didn't want you watching him die. He wanted you to focus on building your future. He believed you'd refuse to let him go. Alexander's knees nearly gave out. Everything he had believed for 8 years had been wrong. The doctor handed him another envelope. This is from Daniel. Alexander carefully unfolded the handwritten letter. Dear Alex, if you're reading this, then you're probably angry that I kept this from you. I know, but I also know you. You would have sold the company, ignored your dreams, and spent every second trying to save me. I couldn't let you sacrifice your life for mine. So I became the villain. I let you hate me, because hatred is easier to carry than grief. If I get another chance, I'd choose you as my brother all over again. Alexander could read no further. Tears blurred every word. For the first time since becoming CEO, he cried openly. Ava quietly stood beside him. She didn't speak, she simply stayed. Nearly 12 hours later, rescue teams finally received an emergency beacon. A damaged life raft had been spotted. Everyone rushed toward the operations screen. An officer spoke into the radio. We have visual confirmation. Several survivors had been found. One by one, names were confirmed. Then, Daniel Kingston. Alive. Alexander covered his face with both hands. He let out a long breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Ava smiled through tears. He's alive. Alexander nodded silently. I wasted 8 years. No. Ava gently squeezed his hand. You still have time. 3 days later, Daniel was transferred to a hospital in New York. He looked thinner, older, but alive. When Alexander entered the room, neither brother spoke. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Finally, Daniel smiled weakly. You still wear ugly ties. Alexander laughed through tears. You still make terrible jokes. The distance of 8 painful years disappeared in a single embrace. Neither cared who was watching. Neither cared who cried first. They had found each other again. As the brothers talked late into the evening, Daniel suddenly looked toward Ava. So, you're the woman who taught my stubborn brother how to smile. Ava blushed. I didn't do much. Daniel laughed softly. You have no idea. He reached into his bedside drawer and pulled out a small velvet box. Alexander frowned. What's that? Daniel smiled mischievously. I've been carrying this for months. Alexander looked confused. Why? Daniel handed him the box. I knew you'd need it eventually. Alexander slowly opened it. Inside was a beautiful diamond engagement ring. He looked at Daniel in disbelief. You planned this? Daniel grinned. I've known you longer than anyone. You fall in love once, and when you do, you never let go. Alexander slowly turned toward Ava. His heart raced. He took one step closer, then another. The hospital room became completely silent as he lowered himself onto one knee, opened the ring box, looked into Ava's tear-filled eyes, and softly said, Ava Parker, will you marry me? The hospital room fell completely silent. Doctors paused outside the door. Nurses smiled from the hallway. Daniel watched with a grin despite the monitors beside his bed. Alexander remained on one knee, holding the ring with slightly trembling hands. His confident voice, the one that had convinced investors around the world, was suddenly gone. For the first time in years, the billionaire CEO was nervous, very nervous. Ava looked into his eyes. Tears streamed down her cheeks. You really mean it? Alexander smiled gently. I've negotiated billion-dollar deals without shaking, but asking you this is the hardest thing I've ever done. Ava laughed through her tears. She nodded. Yes, I'll marry you. The room erupted in applause. Daniel laughed so hard that one of the nurses reminded him to slow down. Alexander slipped the ring onto Ava's finger before pulling her into a warm embrace. Neither noticed the cameras outside the hospital. Neither cared. For that moment, the world belonged only to them. News of the engagement spread within hours. Every major news outlet carried the story. Employees at Kingston Global celebrated together. Emma wiped away happy tears. I knew it. The office buzzed with excitement. Flowers arrived by the hundreds. Letters of congratulations poured in from around the world. But while everyone else celebrated, someone else was watching. From a prison visitation room, Victor Hale. He stared at the television with cold eyes. They think they've won. He slowly smiled. They have no idea what's coming. Across the table sat a sharply dressed man. His face remained hidden beneath the shadow of a cap. Victor slid a sealed envelope across the table. Everything you need is inside. The man picked it up. What do you want in return? Victor answered quietly. Destroy Alexander Kingston. Meanwhile, life couldn't have seemed more perfect. Daniel's health steadily improved. Doctors scheduled a heart transplant evaluation. Alexander reduced his workload to spend more time with family. For the first time in years, the Kingston brothers shared dinners, laughed together, and rebuilt the relationship they had almost lost forever. Ava quickly became part of those moments. She wasn't impressed by wealth. She wasn't interested in luxury. She simply made every room feel warmer. Daniel often joked, I always hoped my brother would marry someone who could argue with him. Ava smiled. I usually win. Alexander pretended to disagree. You wish. Everyone laughed. A month later, wedding planning officially began. Ava wanted a small ceremony. Alexander's board wanted a global media event. The press wanted exclusive coverage. Neither bride nor groom wanted any of it. One evening, they escaped to the same rooftop, where their journey had changed forever. The city lights stretched endlessly below. Alexander wrapped his coat around Ava as the evening breeze grew colder. Remember the first night we met? She smiled. You refused my umbrella. I was stubborn. You still are, he laughed. Probably. After a comfortable silence, Alexander reached into his pocket. I have something. He handed her a small velvet pouch. Inside was the old silver bracelet she had unknowingly left behind in the hotel suite on the morning after their one-night encounter. Ava gasped. You kept this? For over a year. Why didn't you give it back? Alexander looked at the bracelet. It reminded me that for one night, I wasn't alone. Ava gently held his hand. You never will be again. The following week, Kingston Global announced a massive international charity initiative. Instead of asking for wedding gifts, Alexander and Ava invited friends, business partners, and world leaders to donate toward children's hospitals, emergency housing, and educational scholarships. The response exceeded every expectation. Millions of dollars were pledged within days. Entire communities benefited before the wedding had even taken place. Ava couldn't have been happier. Helping people had always mattered more than expensive celebrations. 3 weeks before the wedding, Emma entered Alexander's office carrying an overnight delivery envelope. It arrived anonymously. Alexander frowned. No return address? Emma shook her head. He opened the envelope. Inside was a single photograph. His smile disappeared instantly. The picture showed Ava. She appeared unconscious inside the back seat of a black SUV. Across the bottom of the photo, someone had written in red ink, "She said yes to your proposal. Now let's see if she survives the wedding." Alexander's heart nearly stopped. He looked up sharply. When was this delivered? 5 minutes ago. His phone rang, an unknown number. He answered immediately. A distorted voice spoke calmly. "If you want to see your fiancée alive, come alone, or you'll lose her. The same way you almost lost your brother." The line went dead. Alexander looked back at the photograph. His hands clenched into fists. Without waiting for security or the police, he grabbed his car keys and raced out of the building, unaware that the person behind the call had already anticipated his every move, and that driving there alone was exactly the trap they had spent months preparing. Alexander ignored every call from his security team. He ignored Emma. He ignored the police. The only thought racing through his mind was Ava. He drove through the pouring rain toward an abandoned shipping warehouse on the edge of the harbor. The anonymous message had included only one location, nothing else. As he stepped inside the dark warehouse, his voice echoed through the empty building. No answer. Only silence. Suddenly, lights flickered on. A slow clap echoed from the shadows. The man from Victor Hale's prison visit stepped forward. His name was Marcus Reed, a former corporate security contractor who had once worked for Kingston Global before being fired for fraud. "You came alone," Marcus said with a smile. "I knew you would." Alexander looked around. "Where is Ava?" Marcus pointed toward a chair in the center of the warehouse. Ava was tied to it, but she was awake. The moment she saw Alexander, she shouted, "It's a trap!" "Leave!" Marcus laughed. Too late. Several armed men stepped out from behind shipping containers. Surrounding Alexander, Marcus held up a folder. "Transfer control of Kingston Global to the trust I've prepared." "Do that?" And she walks away. Alexander looked at Ava, then at the documents. Without hesitation, he picked up the pen. Ava shook her head violently. "No! Don't do it! You built this company!" Alexander smiled gently. "I can build another company. I can't replace you." Before the pen touched the paper, loud sirens echoed outside. Marcus frowned. "What?" The warehouse doors burst open. Police officers rushed inside from every direction. "Police! Drop your weapons!" Marcus stared at Alexander. "You called them." Alexander smiled. "No." Everyone turned toward Ava. She quietly lifted one hand. The ropes around her wrists fell to the floor. She had secretly cut them minutes earlier using the small emergency blade attached to the keychain Alexander had once given her. "When Marcus forced me to send the fake photo," Ava said, "I activated the emergency tracker hidden inside the keychain." Emma had designed the company's executive safety system months earlier after Victor's threats. The tracker had silently sent her location to security the moment she pressed it. Marcus tried to run. He barely reached the exit before officers tackled him to the ground. His accomplices surrendered within minutes. The nightmare was over. Several weeks later, Victor Hale and Marcus Reed were both sentenced to lengthy prison terms for fraud, kidnapping, conspiracy, and multiple financial crimes. The investigation officially cleared Kingston Global of every allegation. The company's reputation became stronger than ever. Alexander publicly announced stricter corporate ethics policies and expanded employee protection programs so that no one inside the company would ever face similar corruption again. Spring arrived. The rain that had brought Alexander and Ava together was replaced by warm sunshine. Instead of holding a lavish wedding at a luxury hotel, they chose the garden of the children's hospital where they had volunteered together. Rows of white flowers lined the pathways. Children, whose medical bills had been paid by the Kingston Foundation, scattered flower petals down the aisle. Employees, doctors, nurses, scholarship students, and families whose lives had been changed by the foundation filled the seats. Daniel, now recovering well after his successful heart surgery, stood proudly as Alexander's best man. Rachel attended as Ava's maid of honor. Before the ceremony began, she hugged her sister tightly. "I'm sorry it took me so many years to become the sister you deserved." Ava smiled through tears. "We still have the rest of our lives. You don't have to make up for the past. We'll make new memories instead." Rachel nodded, unable to hold back her tears. As Ava walked down the aisle, Alexander forgot about the guests, the cameras, and the world around him. All he could see was the woman who had once offered a lonely stranger an umbrella on a rainy night. The officiant smiled. "Alexander Kingston, do you take Ava Parker to be your wife?" "I do." "Ava Parker, do you take Alexander Kingston to be your husband?" She smiled brightly. "I do." They exchanged rings. The officiant laughed. "You may kiss your bride." Alexander gently cupped Ava's face. Their kiss was met with cheers, applause, and happy tears from everyone present. Daniel wiped his eyes dramatically. "I always cry at weddings." Emma laughed. "No, you cry at everything." The guests burst into laughter. Months later, Kingston Global continued to grow, but its greatest success was no longer measured only by profits. The Kingston Foundation expanded into dozens of countries, funding children's hospitals, scholarships, disaster relief, and affordable housing. Ava continued leading humanitarian projects while remaining the same humble woman she had always been. She still visited hospitals without cameras. She still remembered employees' birthdays. She still believed that small acts of kindness could change lives. Alexander often joked that she was the true CEO of his heart. She always laughed and reminded him that he still had paperwork waiting on his desk. One rainy evening, nearly 2 years after the night that changed everything, they returned to the luxury hotel where they had first met. The rooftop looked exactly the same. Alexander held an umbrella over both of them. Ava smiled. "You finally learned to use one." He laughed. "I had a very good teacher." They stood together, overlooking the city lights as rain softly fell around them. The storm that had once brought together two lonely strangers had become the beginning of a lifetime they never expected, but would forever cherish together. Like, subscribe, and support my channel. I really need your support. If you enjoy my video, please share it and leave your feedback in the comments.